In the last 6 months, Unions New South Wales has spent much of its time and energy returning to the grassroots. The Peak Union Council is establishing local union community councils right across the state to forge stronger campaigns and connect with communities. Adam Kerslake works at Unions New South Wales and is coordinating the local groups. He joins me now in the studio. Adam, can you explain this new community organising philosophy?
Yeah, I can, Emily. What the community organising philosophy is that we're bringing local activists together in local communities. They're coming together, they have regular meetings, they have events, and they conduct political campaigns in support of a broadly progressive agenda. So we have about 37 of these established across the state or in the process of being established across the state right now. So we'll bring together nurses and teachers and cops and ambos and fireys and people who work in factories and shops, and they come together and talk about rights at work, secure jobs, and how can we make our communities thrive.
And I guess, so you've touched on this, how it actually works in practice.
Well, how it works in practice is that each of the unions contact their local delegates, and they bring those local delegates into the same place at the same time. And then we start talking about some of the challenges we face. And what we find, and you see this when you work at Unions New South Wales, is that right across the board, working people face similar sorts of challenges. Rights at work are a massive issue. Casualisation is a massive issue, with over 40% of the workforce now working in insecure forms of employment, either in casualised labour hire or some other form of insecure employment. So how do we get secure jobs? And then there's a question of what does that mean for the broader community? Because if everybody's working in a casualised jobs, people can't get home loans, that affects the housing market, people can't buy and spend money on discretionary items, and that affects the local economy. So we're campaigning for good jobs, great jobs, and thriving communities, because the other dimension of this is, of course, services, the kind of services that the government provides and the kind of way in which those services are delivered.
So why the shift away from workplaces?
The shift away from workplaces is occurring is because we can't win a great future for working people inside workplaces alone. When John Howard was last around and we had work choices legislation, our ability to be able to represent members, our collective ability, was severely undermined by work choices. So we had to go outside of the workplaces to start a community conversation about how do we want to live, what kind of rights do we want to have at work, what does this mean more broadly. At the moment we went outside workplaces and started this conversation, was the moment that we began to change the political dimensions of the campaign. So the same thing applies to work and services. Once we start talking about, you know, like the moment we start talking about the type of society that we want, that then feeds back into our ability to be able to win workplace rights.
I understand there have been some success with this model recently in Grafton.
Yeah, absolutely. The Grafton story is a case in point. So in Grafton, there was a by-election last year, in November last year, when Steve Cansdell stood down and Chris Galaptis ran for the National Party. At the time, Barry O'Farrell was asked about the future of Grafton Jail, a fairly large employer in Grafton, and gave an ironclad guarantee there'll be no job losses for the jail. There wouldn't be any downsizing of the jail. We then formed a local group called Clarence Valley Community Unions, and that was comprised of police, teachers, nurses, and a bunch of other local people. They came together and said, we want to start putting out a progressive voice for how we want to live. We then had the budget in June of this year, and the government announced major job cuts. An area that was affected by this was corrective services, and the department made the decision that they were going to downsize Grafton Jail, despite promises from Barry O'Farrell. Of 120 people employed in the jail, 108 people lost their job. Now, our normal industrial response, like the workplace action, which we were just talking about, would be that those 108 or perhaps 120 people would do some sort of campaign. They would do a rally, and that's what they announced. When Clarence Valley Community Unions heard about it, they kicked into gear and they began to organise. So in a normal rally, they announced a rally 4 days after the announcement. With 120 people in a workplace, we might get 200 people at the rally if we're very lucky. When Clarence Valley Community Unions kicked in and began to organise the whole town, we ended up with 3,500 people turning up to the rally. In fact, the whole town was organised of Grafton, where we had local businesses, the local Chamber of Commerce, the mayor, who was a National Party mayor. We ended up with businesses closing down on the day, and the whole community turned up. Why they turned up is because if you take 108 jobs out of Grafton, it's a bit like closing BHP Steel in Wollongong. Everybody saw house prices would be affected, local jobs, small businesses would be affected, so that everyone in the town lined up. The only person who supported the jail closure was the local member, Chris Galaptis, and in the face of the rally, he changed his view and said he became a champion for the jail. So what we're saying is, if we want to win these sort of rights, we actually have to go beyond the workplace and start talking about the kind of impact that these changes can have on the broader community. So it's been very successful in Grafton. Although the government's proceeding with jail closures, they're now moving 75 jobs to Grafton. So in the face of job cuts amounting to somewhere around 15,000 across the state, they're finding it 75 have to go to Grafton. I don't think Grafton will have any government job losses in the future too quickly, and I think, you know, if that happens in Grafton, why can't it happen in Lismore? Why can't it happen in Maitland? Why can't it happen in Port? And then you begin to move across the state, and when you do that, you see where the 35 groups can begin to kick in. And of course, this applies for federally as well. You know, when Tony Abbott says he's going to run for office, we need to start putting the acid on those coalition MPs about where they stand, and we also need to push the Labor Party about where they stand on a range of issues as well.
Thanks, Adam. Looking forward to seeing how it all unfolds. And of course, for more information, go to localunions.org.au.